Sometimes to get your head around a huge, really complex conflict, you have to zoom in. Way, way in. Today, we're going to do just that. We're looking at the story of a single place, the village of Tarshiha, to see how its history tells the story of a much larger conflict, in miniature.
So that really begs the question, right? How can the story of just one village possibly help us understand a conflict that spanned over 75 years and affected millions of people? Well, let's dive in and see.
All right, so let's start with the village itself.
This is Tarshiha. It's an ancient village in the Upper Galilee. And I mean ancient. It has roots that go all the way back to Roman times. But it's the village's modern history that gives us this incredible lens, a way to see the pivotal 1948 war and its very long shadow on a truly human scale.
Because, to really get what changed, we first have to understand what was there before. So, what was life actually like in Tarshiha before everything was turned upside down?
I mean, just look at these numbers. They paint a really clear picture. In just a little over 2 decades, the population more than doubled. This was not a community in decline. It was a bustling, stable village where both Muslim and Christian families were living and growing together.
And it was prosperous. Sources from the time actually described the economy as well off. People here weren't just scraping by. We're talking about skilled workers who commuted to cities like Haifa, they grew profitable crops like tobacco, and there was a really strong local craft scene. This village was a connected, thriving economic hub.
Then, the world stage intervened. In 1947, the United Nations puts this major proposal on the table, the Partition Plan. The idea was to divide the territory of what was then mandatory Palestine and create 2 new states, one Arab and one Jewish.
And here is the crucial detail. Under that UN plan, Tarshiha was officially allocated to be part of the proposed Arab state. Remember that point. Because what was decided in the halls of diplomacy was about to collide head-on with what happened on the ground.
And that brings us to the war, to the seismic, landscape-changing events of 1948 that would alter not just Tarshiha, but the entire region forever.
Because of its location and its size, the village was hugely strategic. And so, the Arab Liberation Army chose Tarshiha as its regional headquarters. That single decision turned this prosperous village into a very high-value military target for Israeli forces. And when the end came, wow, it was swift. Just look at this timeline from October 1948. It kicks off with some initial bombing on the 22nd. Then on the 29th, Operation Hiram is launched, with a really intense bombardment that night. The very same day, the village falls. And just a day later, you see a mass flight of both fighters and civilians heading north, towards Lebanon.
To try and wrap your head around the intensity of that final attack, just consider this number: 21 tons. That is the weight of bombs dropped on this one village in a single night. It's an absolutely immense amount of firepower.
And that mass flight, well, it wasn't some unfortunate side effect. Historians who have cited Israeli military records from that time show the objective was very clear. The heavy bombing was explicitly intended to cause a mass flight. Depopulating the village was a documented military tactic.
So, what happens after the battle is over? After the smoke clears? What grows from the ruins? Now we're going to look at how the village of Tarshiha was completely and utterly transformed.
Sometimes the sheer scale of a historic loss is best understood through something really small and personal. Alfat Mahoud, a refugee whose family fled Tarshiha in '48, said this about her grandfather. He held on to the rusty key of his house, a symbol of the profound and continuing loss. That one key represents everything that was left behind.
And these numbers, they show the new reality that followed. Remember that thriving, growing, entirely Arab village from before? By 1969, Arabs were just a third of the population in this new, merged city. Fast forward to 2002, and they're only a fifth. It is a complete demographic reversal written right here in the data.
So how did this actually happen? Well, it wasn't by accident. It happened through a deliberate, step-by-step administrative process. First, in 1957, the new Jewish town of Malo is founded right next door. Then, just 6 years later, it's administratively merged with what's left of Tarshiha. And by 1996, the process is complete. The whole thing is declared an official city, and the original village of Tarshiha is now just one neighborhood inside of it.
And the original land of Tarshiha village, it didn't just sit empty. It actually became the foundation for a number of new Israeli communities. Places like Maalat, Meona, and Kfar Vradim were all established on land that had once belonged to the village. Which brings us to today, and to the deeply complex, layered, and contested legacy that now exists on this one small piece of land.
And here, right here, is where we arrive at the absolute core of the conflict. Two completely different stories about the exact same events. For Palestinians, it's a narrative of forced expulsion, what they call the Nakba, and the deeply held right of return. For Israelis, it's a narrative of a defensive war for national survival and the incredible task of building a nation. These two histories are fundamentally at odds.
So maybe the best way to think about the history here isn't as one single story, but as layers. You have these ancient Roman foundations at the bottom. On top of that, an Ottoman administrative center. Then a prosperous British Mandate village. Then you have the violent rupture of 1948. On top of that, a new Israeli town is built. And finally, you have today's merged but often very divided modern city. All of these layers exist at the same time, in the same physical space. And even though today it's officially called a mixed city, where people share streets and city services, the wider conflict is never ever far away. Traumatic events, like the horrific 1974 massacre at a school in Malot or rocket attacks during the 2006 war, are just devastating reminders that no matter how much daily life is shared, local peace is incredibly fragile as long as the larger conflict remains unresolved.
And so the story of Tarshiha leaves us with a final and very challenging question. When two different histories, two opposing stories of who belongs and why, occupy the very same piece of land, can they ever actually build a single shared future? It's a question this one village forces all of us to confront.